I am the attorney who represented Mathew Bowyer, who was the bookie related to the Ohtani gambling scandal involving Mizuhara, who was Ohtani's interpreter. Mr. Bowyer first hired me in October of 2023. He was introduced to me by another lawyer friend who does not do federal work, and he knows that I am the go-to federal person, and so he referred the case to me. We went over to Matt's house actually on a Saturday afternoon. I met Matt and he told me the whole story about how the FBI had come and conducted a raid, told me everything that they took, and he explained to me that he had been one of the top 5 bookies in the country for a number of years, and that the feds came, they took a bunch of cash, I think it was like $250,000, they took all of his wife's purses, which was very upsetting, and they took some jewelry, and it was led, the task force or the execution of the search warrant, or raid as we call it, was led by an IRS agent named Chris Seymour. So there were Homeland Security agents, FBI agents, and an IRS agent, which is not uncommon when it comes to an investigation of this magnitude. So Mr. Bowyer hired me, I reached out to the U.S. Attorney, and they advised me that they wanted him to cooperate in a much bigger case, and I actually think that Matt's case was collateral damage from this much bigger case. But they wanted him to cooperate. Now, in most cooperation cases, the very first thing they want the person to do is just go in and admit everything that they ever did. Matt said, no, I'm not going to do that, and I don't want to name anybody that worked with me. I'm not going to throw anybody under the bus. And we said, I don't think they're going to go for it. We being myself and my prison consultant friend, who was also working with Matt. And I said, but I'll ask them. And I asked him, and lo and behold, this U.S. attorney, actually, she's an attorney with the Department of Justice, said, sure, we'll talk with him. So we went up to the Homeland Security office in Long Beach, and we sat down with the IRS agent, FBI agent, Homeland Security officer, my lawyer friend Chris, my paralegal Matt, and myself, and he answered all of their questions about their broader investigation, which provided them with very useful information. The meeting lasted at least 3 hours. At the end of the meeting, they gave us a box with all of his wife's purses, which I was very personally happy about. And then we proceeded to have multiple conversations with them about this bigger investigation. In January of 2024, we received a certified letter from Tisha Thompson from ESPN, and she said she was writing a story about how Shohei Ohtani was Mr. Boyer's client. And so we said, well, tell us what you know and we can confirm or deny whatever facts you have. And she knew everything. She knew names of people. She knew numbers. She knew everything. So we told her that Mr. Bowyer had actually never met Shohei Ohtani. He had no dealings whatsoever with him. He had been introduced to Ohtani's interpreter at a poker game in San Diego. He was introduced to him by David Fletcher, who's another baseball player. And just to give you some background, it is illegal for any sports figure, so in particular a baseball player, to bet on baseball. What's his name? There was a famous baseball player who was banned from playing baseball again. He just died recently. And so Ohtani would have been banned from playing baseball. And he's allegedly one of the best baseball players that ever lived. So it would have been a tragedy if that had happened to him and the LA Dodgers. Mizuhara, it turns out, was the one who was betting with my client. So we told Tisha this and she said, okay, well, I'm going to go back and do more journalism. So she had the integrity to not publish the story. And she said, but the feds are going to leak this story to the LA Times. Well, lo and behold, March, I get a call from the LA Times saying, hey, we're writing a story about how your client is betting, or Shohei Ohtani was betting with your client. And I said, actually, we can't confirm that. I can tell you that Mizuhara was his client, not Shohei Ohtani. And this guy said, well, we're going to write the story anyway. And I said, you're the LA Times and you're going to blow up the LA Dodgers and Shohei Ohtani on a story that we're not confirming for you? That's crazy. Okay, so this is the crazy thing. When the LA Times journalist called me and I told him that Shohei Ohtani was not my client's client, he said, so why is the FBI so sure that he is? And I said, well, you're going to have to ask the FBI. And by the way, you just outed your source. And he goes, no, I didn't. So anyway, the next 5 days, I was on the phone constantly between Tisha Thompson and this jerk from the LA Times. We went back and forth, back and forth. Tisha kept saying, I have some really interesting news. What she did, though, was she reached out to Ippei Mizuhara, the interpreter, and she interviewed him for 90 minutes. And he told her that Ohtani had loaned him the money, the first $500,000. So there were several $500,000 wires that Mr. Bowyer received from Shohei Ohtani's bank account. They were wired to a friend of Mr. Boyer's. And so Mr. Bowyer thought, wow, Shohei Ohtani's my client. And of course he bragged about it because it's great marketing, right? So Tisha Thompson then interviewed Mizuhara a day later and everything changed. So I get a call saying the story is out. LA Times beat her to the punch, which I was really upset about. But the story ended up being that Mizuhara, Ohtani's trusted interpreter, had stolen the money from Ohtani. He had access to and control, I guess he managed his account. The fact that Ohtani was making $700 million under his contract, I guess he didn't notice $17 million missing from his account. There were $500,000 wires going to Mr. Bowyer every 2 weeks. So the story broke, and all of a sudden Mr. Boyer's case went from being one that was going to be about the charges that we were facing were running an illegal bookmaking business, money laundering because they laundered the money through the casinos in Vegas, and filing a false tax return because Mr. Bowyer wrote off $4 million that he had lost in Vegas on the $4 million that he had earned, and so he only declared a certain amount of income and paid $600,000 in taxes, which I argued to the judge is more than most of us have ever paid. But it wasn't the appropriate amount. The appropriate amount was $1.6 million, I guess, above what he had already paid. So you don't get to write off your gambling losses, even if that's your business, because it's an illegal business. And we also had a tax attorney working with us on the case who was helping us with all of the IRS issues, which were plenty. So suddenly this case that was interesting became media worthy. So in August, when we went to court to do his change of plea hearing, there was loads of media there. I was getting calls from every media outlet, and we're talking New York Times, LA Times, Washington Post, Associated Press, Forbes, of course ESPN, LA Times, Orange County Register, and 40 or more reporters from Japan. Matt had Japanese journalists in his driveway. One of the KTLA reporters was in his driveway, which is actually trespassing. Hedy Chang from NBC News was somebody, she was across the street from Matt's, but all of these people were reaching out for interviews. So it blew up. It became absolutely sensational. So absolutely no idea what I was getting myself into when I took the case. Luckily, I really, really liked Mr. Bowyer and his family, so it was really fun working on it. And it was also interesting learning about how to deal with the media at that level. But that's another video for another day. So when Tisha Thompson first reached out to me, I immediately contacted the U.S. Attorney's Office because he had a cooperation agreement with them. And this was public. I'm not sharing anything I can't share. But because he had a cooperation agreement, we thought, well, we better go tell them what's going on. So we raced up to the U.S. Attorney's Office. We started telling him about this whole Shohei Ohtani Mizuhara thing. They could not have been less interested. Fast forward 3 months when the story broke, all of a sudden they're like, can you send us the spreadsheet of all of Mizuhara's bets from your website? Because he ran his business through a website. So we sent them a 268-page spreadsheet which contained 19,000 bets that Mizuhara made with Matt over an 18-month period of time in 2022. The bets started out small, $50, $100, and then they escalated $250,000 to whatever, I don't remember, but they were huge. We also explained to them the time zone, and Matt has said in many of his interviews that he'd be watching Shohei Ohtani playing baseball and receiving bets on his cell phone from Mizuhara. It's an ID number that people use, and if they were sharing it, there was no way that it was Ohtani because he was actually playing at that time. So the U.S. Attorney's Office asked for the time zone for the website, which was based in Costa Rica, and then they knew that it was actually Mizuhara. I have never seen the U.S. Attorney's Office indict somebody that quickly. It took them 2 weeks before they indicted Ippei Mizuhara, and of course that was a huge media storm. In the process of talking about Shohei Ohtani and Ippei Mizuhara, they discovered another bookie that Matthew knew. Of course, they had all of this information because they had Matt's website, they had his cell phone, they had all of his text messages. So they knew that Matt was in touch with this individual, and so he gave them information about that person. Honestly, just basically said, yeah, that guy was betting with him. That was the extent of the information that we gave the government. But because he had been working on this other big investigation and these two cases, and the Mizuhara case, of course, which was huge, they decided to give Mathew cooperation credit. The other thing was, in the very beginning of the case, because he was cooperating on this other big case, the government lawyer, the U.S. attorney, who is no longer with the office, that's a long story, had said he's probably going to get home confinement. But because of the change in administration and things getting deprioritized, this other investigation has taken a back burner, and it was going to take a really long time before the case was completed, before Matt could get his credit and be sentenced. So he finally said, forget it, I don't want to wait anymore. This is too stressful. I need to get on with my life, even if it means I have to serve time. He knew he was going to serve time in a prison camp, not a terrible prison, and he just wanted to get it over with. I, of course, really wanted him to get home confinement because I did not think he needed to go to prison for this case for many, many reasons. But he said, it's okay, whatever happens. I know you've done everything you can for me. Let's just go for it. So I emailed the new U.S. attorney, who was the chief of the fraud division in L.A., and said, hey, my client wants to get it over with. He doesn't want to wait for the other investigation to be finished. So she took into consideration that cooperation, but didn't actually give him credit for it. Instead, she just gave him as much as she could on the other two investigations as a consistent way of offering credit in these cases. She had to follow certain inter-office guidelines that are, I guess, secret. But since nothing came of that other investigation yet, she was unable to give him more credit. But starting out, the plea that he did was limited to 2022, which was also very beneficial because the numbers could have been much bigger, because sentencing in federal cases is based on the amount of loss. So in this case, it would have been the taxes that hadn't been paid. It could have been much higher. He was looking at 47 to 56 months pursuant to the federal sentencing guidelines. Probation, who does not take into consideration any of the cooperation, was offering 36 months, or recommending to the court 36 months. And she didn't know at that point that he had paid the $1.6 million in restitution. He did that a little bit after the interview. But she also knew that he had made extraordinary acceptance of responsibility. He had tremendous support from family, friends, tons of character letters. There were 200 people at his sentencing hearing. The courtroom was completely full, and there was overflow down in the jury room. There were TVs where they could watch the sentencing hearing. And this is after people know that he committed a crime and he pled guilty. A lot of people lose support at that point in a case, but Matt did not. He had such loyal friends, an amazing family, 5 children, 4 daughters who all wrote beautiful letters for him that the judge commented on at sentencing. Again, the fact that he paid restitution, that almost never happens, maybe in 10% of cases, especially to be paid in full prior to sentencing. That just never happens. And then the fact that Mathew was really honest in expressing remorse and going on social media and talking about it, talking about his crimes, accepting responsibility, saying, you know what, you do the crime, you got to do the time, and teaching his children there are consequences for your actions, and also helping a lot of other people who were struggling with gambling addiction. Matt is a classic gambling addict. He was losing millions and millions of dollars in Las Vegas and all over the world, actually. He was traveling all over the world gambling and losing money. So it was all very intertwined with his addiction, but they sent him on private jets, and he got first-class tickets to amazing events, and he got to stay in this penthouse suite at these different resorts in Vegas, and he played golf with Charles Barkley, and just stuff that normal people don't experience in their everyday lives. And this was an everyday or every other week kind of a thing for Mr. Bowyer. Finally, we were set for sentencing, and as I said, there were tons of people there, loads of media, and the judge really listened to everything we said, and he did acknowledge all of the mitigation in Mathew's case. So he accepted the government's recommendation of 15 months, which I still wasn't happy with, and he gave him a year and a day. The reason he gave him the extra day is so that he doesn't have to do the whole year. In federal court, if you're sentenced to a year, you do a year. If you're given a year and a day, then you can get what we call good time credits, or statutory good time credits, where you get 15% of your sentence off. So you do 85%. But then now, because of the First Step Act, there are things called earn credits, where you earn credit. And Mathew had also worked with this organization that helped institute the First Step Act called Prison Professors. He had volunteered about 100 hours, not required by court, And these gentlemen who run prison professors are educating the people who are in prison. They're helping at least 1 million people in state and federal prison as we speak. And Mathew volunteered for them. He will continue to volunteer for them. He spoke at USC and talked about addiction, and he talked about really taking responsibility when you mess up, which he did. So the judge acknowledged the extraordinary mitigating factors in his case. He listened to everything that I had to say. But at the end of the day, he just felt that there had to be punishment, there had to be jail time. I said to the judge, look, it's not his fault that this is a high-profile case, and I hope that the court won't feel that it needs to send a message to the public by, punishing Matt in order to send a message because this is a high-profile case. And he promised me that he would not do that. But he still felt that one of the purposes of sentencing is deterrence, and so he needed to deter the public from engaging in this kind of conduct, and so he sentenced him to 1 year and a day. My client was overjoyed. Of course, his family was extremely emotional. This means he's going to be gone for probably 8 to 10 months, but in reality, he could get home confinement as soon as 3 or 4 months. So that is what we're hoping for. He is surrendering on October 10th. He is doing everything he can to prepare himself and his family for his prison sentence. And he's supposed to surrender October 10th. That's the story. So the moral of the story here is that you have to have an experienced federal criminal defense attorney when you are facing serious criminal charges. My friend knew that he could not handle the case as a marijuana lawyer. This was just completely out of his ballpark. So he brought me in, and I was able to walk Matt through the process starting literally from day one. I was also able to introduce him to my prison consultant / mitigation expert who was able to work with him. His participation in prison professors and doing this volunteer service. He did therapy, he did Gamblers Anonymous, and he was able to get these beautiful, beautiful, beautiful character letters. Another thing that I was able to share with the judge was that I attended Matt's 50th birthday party, and there were over 100 people there, and people made speeches, and the love in that room. And I told the judge, I was thinking about sentencing when I was at the party and thinking, what of this night can I share with the court? And the judge was smiling. He felt my sincerity, and I just said over and over again, Matt is an extraordinary person. The gift of really getting to know my clients and really working with them over time to develop a strategy and to prepare mitigation is what gets a result like this. Because if I take myself out of the equation, 1 year and a day for somebody like Mathew Bowyer, who was running this huge illegal bookmaking operation, making millions of dollars, laundering the money through the casinos, and not paying all of the taxes that he owed on this money is really quite extraordinary. And that's just because we worked together on this for 2 solid years to come to this great result. And I'm very proud of it, and I'm very proud to have been part of Mathew Boyer's journey.